Michael Jenkins had finally achieved his dream of homeownership after years of saving. At 32, he'd spent the last decade living in cramped apartments, meticulously building his down payment fund while his friends splurged on vacations and luxury cars. The day he received the keys to 1473 Maple Avenue in Oak Ridge Estates felt surreal, a physical manifestation of his hard work and sacrifice. The modest ranch-style house wasn't perfect by any stretch. The previous owners had left behind faded yellow wallpaper in the kitchen, bathroom fixtures straight out of the 1990s, and a front yard that hadn't seen proper landscaping in what appeared to be years. But these imperfections didn't bother Michael. There were opportunities to make the space truly his. "It's not much, but it's mine," he told his parents when they visited that first weekend, his voice catching slightly as he led them through the three-bedroom home. His father had clapped him on the shoulder with pride, while his mother had already started measuring windows for curtains. During his first week as a homeowner, Michael attacked his project list with enthusiasm. He spent an entire Saturday removing the wallpaper and applying a fresh coat of soft gray paint to the kitchen walls. On Sunday morning, he made his first of many trips to the local hardware store, returning with supplies to tackle the exterior. By Sunday afternoon, his previously beige front door boasted a new coat of cheerful cobalt blue paint. The color brought life to the neutral exterior of the house, creating a welcoming focal point that made Michael smile every time he approached his new home. Next on his list was replacing the dented, rusting mailbox that tilted precariously by the curb. After browsing online for hours, he had selected a sleek, modern design with clean lines and a brushed nickel finish. It wasn't cheap, but Michael felt it was important to invest in quality for his new home. "Looking good," called Mrs. Ramirez from next door as she walked her corgi past Michael's house while he was installing the mailbox. "The place is already looking better than when the Thompsons lived here." Michael straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Thanks, just trying to make it feel like home." Mrs. Ramirez's smile faltered slightly. "It's lovely, dear," though she hesitated, glancing down the street before continuing in a lowered voice. "You might want to check with the HOA about that mailbox. And the door color. Some people around here are sticklers for the rules." "Oh, I've already reviewed the guidelines," Michael assured her confidently. "There's nothing specific about door colors except that they can't be neon, and mailboxes just need to be in good repair and appropriate to the neighborhood aesthetic. I made sure everything's compliant before I started." Mrs. Ramirez nodded, though her expression remained doubtful. "Well, that's good. It's just that Patricia, she's the HOA president. She tends to have her own interpretation of the rules sometimes." "I'm sure it'll be fine," Michael replied with an easy smile, hammering the last support into place for his new mailbox. "If there's an issue, I've got the documentation." As Mrs. Ramirez continued her walk, Michael noticed a few other neighbors slow in as they drove past his house, their gazes lingering on his improvements. One elderly man even stopped his car completely, staring at the blue door with narrowed eyes before driving on. Michael brushed off the odd behavior. Every neighborhood had its characters, he figured. Besides, he'd done his homework. The HOA guidelines were clear, and his improvements were well within the established parameters. He'd even printed out the relevant sections and filed them away, just in case. As the sun began to set on his first week as a homeowner, Michael stood in his driveway admiring his handiwork. His house was already starting to feel like a home, and he looked forward to many happy years in Oak Ridge Estates. Little did he know that his blue door and modern mailbox had already set in motion a neighborhood drama that would soon escalate beyond anything he could have imagined. Patricia Winters had been the Oak Ridge Estates HOA president for 7 consecutive years, running unopposed after the first 2 candidates who challenged her mysteriously found themselves buried in compliance citations. At 54, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who believed order was life's highest virtue. Her immaculate ash-blonde bob never moved even in strong winds, leading to neighborhood rumors about the industrial-strength hairspray she must use. Every morning at precisely 8:15 a.m., Patricia would exit her perfectly maintained colonial-style home at the entrance to the subdivision, clipboard in hand, reading glasses perched on the end of her nose to begin what residents had dubbed her surveillance rounds. She documented every infraction with the thoroughness of a crime scene investigator. Wilting flowers, garbage bins left out 4 minutes past the mandated retrieval time, and her personal crusade. Unapproved exterior modifications. On Tuesday morning, exactly 9 days after Michael had moved in, Patricia's patrol brought her to Maple Avenue. She stopped abruptly in front of 1473, her thin lips pressing into an even thinner line. The bright blue door caught her attention first, a flagrant violation of what she considered the subdivision's tasteful neutrals aesthetic, despite no specific color prohibitions in the written guidelines. But it was the modernist mailbox that caused her blood pressure to spike. "Absolutely unacceptable," she muttered, pulling out her phone to photograph the evidence from multiple angles. She zoomed in on the brushed nickel finish, shaking her head in disapproval. Patricia had personally selected the standard issue black mailboxes that dotted the neighborhood 15 years ago, and any deviation was, in her mind, an assault on community harmony. For 20 minutes, she stood on the sidewalk, alternating between taking photos and furiously flipping through her dog-eared copy of the HOA guidelines. While the rules mentioned nothing specifically about mailbox designs beyond general maintenance requirements, Patricia had long ago mastered the art of creative interpretation. Section 4, paragraph C clearly states all exterior fixtures must maintain neighborhood aesthetic continuity, she said aloud to herself, highlighting the passage with a fluorescent yellow marker. The fact that aesthetic continuity was never actually defined in the document was, to Patricia, irrelevant. From her oversized purse, she extracted a pre-printed citation form. She had them custom-made at the local print shop and began filling out with practiced efficiency. Under violation, she wrote in bold capital letters, unauthorized mailbox installation and non-conforming DOR color. Under required action, she specified, remove and replace with APRVED designs within 48 hours or face daily penalties. At that moment, Mrs. Ramirez emerged from her house to retrieve her newspaper. Good morning, Patricia, she called with forced cheerfulness. I see you've noticed our new neighbor's improvements. Patricia barely acknowledged the greeting with a curt nod. If you could call them that, this kind of individualistic expression is exactly how property values plummet. First, it's a blue door. Next thing you know, someone's parking a boat in their driveway. Mrs. Ramirez winced. Michael seems like a nice young man. Maybe you could welcome him to the neighborhood before. Rules exist for a reason, Eleanor. Patricia interrupted, signing the citation with a flourish. The time to educate new residents is before they make costly mistakes. Without waiting for a response, Patricia marched up Michael's freshly swept walkway and slapped the neon citation on his door, securing it with extra tape to ensure it wouldn't blow away. She took one final disapproving look at the offending mailbox before continuing her rounds, already mentally composing the email she would send to the other board members about this troubling development. Behind her, Mrs. Ramirez sighed and retreated indoors to text her husband. Hurricane Patricia just made landfall at the Jenkins house. Poor kid has no idea what's coming. Michael's first inkling that something was amiss came when he returned home after a grueling 10-hour shift at the architectural firm where he worked. The blazing yellow citation practically glowed against his newly painted blue door. He peeled it off with a frown, scanning the official-looking document with growing confusion. This has to be some kind of mistake, he muttered, reading the violation description twice to make sure he hadn't misunderstood. He pulled out his phone and quickly searched through his email for the HOA guidelines he carefully reviewed before making any changes to his home. 15 minutes of detailed review confirmed what he already knew. There were no specific prohibitions against either his door color or mailbox design. That night, Michael drafted a polite but firm email to the HOA board, citing the relevant sections of the guidelines and requesting clarification on the alleged violations. He attached photos of similar modifications in other neighborhoods with comparable HOAs, along with property value studies showing that tasteful personalization often increased, rather than decreased, home values. His architectural background gave him confidence in his position. The following morning, as Michael was loading his laptop bag into his car, a black SUV with HOA ID and vanity plates screeched to a halt in front of his driveway. Patricia Winters emerged, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor, flanked by two stern-faced board members, Stan Wilson, a retired accountant with perpetually pursed lips, and Deborah Landers, whose enormous pearl earrings swung hypnotically as she nodded in agreement with everything Patricia said. Mr. Jenkins, Patricia called out, marching up his driveway without waiting for an invitation. I see you ignored our notice of violation. Michael straightened, surprised by the confrontation but determined to remain professional. Actually, Ms. Winters, I was just following up on that. There seems to be a misunderstanding. I've reviewed the guidelines thoroughly and... There's no misunderstanding, Patricia cut in, her voice sharp enough to slice steel. Section 4, paragraph C clearly states that all exterior fixtures must maintain neighborhood aesthetic continuity. She thrust the highlighted page toward him. Michael nodded calmly. Yes, I'm familiar with that section. However, the term aesthetic continuity isn't defined anywhere in the document, and there are no specific restrictions on door colors or mailbox designs as long as they're well-maintained and appropriate to a residential setting. Patricia's face flushed slightly, a crimson tide rising from her neck to her hairline. Everyone knows that doors in Oak Ridge estates are to be painted in earth tones only, and mailboxes must be the standard black model purchased through the HOA office for $85. If that's an actual requirement, it should be explicitly stated in the guidelines, Michael replied, his architect's precision with details serving him well. I'd be happy to comply with any properly documented regulations, but I can't find these specific restrictions anywhere in the materials provided to me at closing. Stan shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his glasses. Patricia, he does have a point about the documentation. I have interpretive authority as president, Patricia interrupted, her voice rising. Her fingers tightened around her clipboard until her knuckles whitened. The board has always deferred to my judgment on aesthetic matters. With all due respect, Michael said, checking his watch and realizing he would be late for his morning meeting, interpretive authority doesn't override the need for clear, written guidelines. I'm happy to discuss this at the next board meeting, but for now, I'll need to see the specific rule in writing before making any changes. Patricia's eyes narrowed dangerously. You have exactly 48 hours to comply, Mr. Jenkins, or you'll face a daily fine of $75 until the violations are corrected. Your rebellious attitude is not welcome in Oak Ridge Estates. I'm not being rebellious, Michael responded, maintaining his composure even as his patience waned. I'm simply asking to see the rule I'm allegedly violating. The citation is your final warning, Patricia declared, spinning on her heel. As she marched back to her SUV, she called over her shoulder. Your modern sensibilities may have been tolerated in your apartment building, but here in Oak Ridge Estates, we have standards. As they drove away, Michael stood in his driveway, bewildered by the encounter. He was now officially late for work, but an even greater concern weighed on his mind. He had inadvertently become entangled in a neighborhood power struggle he had no intention of joining. The week following the confrontation passed in tense silence. Michael had consulted with a realtor friend about HOA regulations and learned that while Patricia's approach was unnecessarily aggressive, HOAs did wield considerable power. Still, his friend advised him to stand his ground on properly documented rules versus interpretive authority. On Friday evening, Michael packed an overnight bag for a long-planned weekend visit to his parents in Riverdale, about 2 hours away. Before leaving, he hesitated, then decided to install the small security camera he purchased for his front door. Given the escalating tension, it seemed a prudent precaution. The wireless camera synced to his phone, allowing him to check footage remotely. Just being paranoid, he told himself as he adjusted the angle to capture both his front door and the area around his mailbox. But better safe than sorry. The weekend provided a welcome respite from homeowner drama. His parents' pride in his achievement was evident in every home-cooked meal and warm conversation. Michael deliberately avoided mentioning the HOA issues, not wanting to tarnish their joy with petty neighborhood politics. Sunday afternoon, as Michael was helping his father with some yard work, his phone pinged with a motion alert from his security camera. Opening the app, he watched in real time as a mail truck stopped at his house. The mail carrier approached his mailbox, looked confused, then moved on without delivering anything. That's odd, Michael muttered, quickly checking the earlier footage. What he saw made his stomach drop. At exactly 7:30 a.m. Saturday morning, Patricia's SUV had pulled up to his curb. The footage clearly showed her emerging from the vehicle with Daniel Ross, the subdivision's maintenance man, who carried a toolbox and a black mailbox identical to those throughout the neighborhood. For 20 minutes, the camera recorded Patricia supervising as Daniel removed Michael's modern mailbox, posts and all, replacing it with the standard-issue black one. Most disturbing of all, Patricia had used a key to open Michael's locked mailbox, removing the contents and transferring them to the new installation. She stole my mailbox, Michael said aloud, his voice tight with disbelief. His father looked up from the hedge he was trimming. What's that, son? The HOA president physically removed my mailbox while I was away, Michael explained, his initial shock rapidly transforming into anger. And she went through my mail. His father put down the shears. That doesn't sound legal. It's not, Michael confirmed, a cold certainty settling in his chest. He packed his bags immediately, cutting his visit short. The drive home felt interminable. Michael's mind raced through possible responses, calling the police, filing a complaint with the HOA board, confronting Patricia directly. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across his property. Standing where his carefully selected mailbox had been was a generic black metal box with a large a priori sticker slapped across its side. Inside his house, the answering machine blinked with a message. Patricia's voice, dripping with satisfaction, filled the room. Mr. Jenkins, this is Patricia Winters. The HOA has resolved your property violations as per Section 8 of the Covenant, which authorizes the board to take corrective action on persistent non-compliance. You'll be billed $250 for the approved replacement mailbox, plus $225 in accumulated fines for the 3 days you remained in violation after notification. We've waived the door color violation for now, but expect compliance within 2 weeks. Welcome to Oak Ridge Estates. Michael deleted the message, his hand shaking with barely controlled rage. He'd never considered himself confrontational, but this crossed every conceivable line. Picking up his phone, he dialed Patricia's number, determined to get answers. "Yes, Mr. Jenkins," she answered on the first ring as if expecting his call. "You removed my personal property without permission," he stated flatly, "and you accessed my private mail." "I corrected an approved violation after ample notice," Patricia replied smoothly. "The HOA covenant gives us that authority." "I want the exact section that authorizes you to remove and replace private property," Michael demanded. "And I want my original mailbox back." Patricia's laugh was short and dismissive. "Your mailbox has been disposed of, Mr. Jenkins. Consider this your initiation into responsible homeownership. The bill will arrive Tuesday." The line went dead before Michael could respond. Standing in his living room, staring at the blue door that would likely be Patricia's next target, Michael made a decision. This wasn't just about aesthetics anymore. This was about boundaries, property rights, and one person's abuse of power. Sleep eluded Michael that night. Each time he closed his eyes, the image of Patricia smugly removing his property replayed in his mind. By 3 a.m., he had abandoned any pretense of rest and sat at his kitchen table with his laptop, researching HOA regulations and homeowner rights. Most articles suggested that while HOAs held significant power, it typically couldn't physically alter private property without court orders, even with covenant provisions. As dawn broke, Michael created an account on homeowneradvocate.com, a forum for people dealing with HOA disputes. He carefully detailed his situation, uploading edited clips from his security footage and screenshots of the HOA guidelines that failed to specify mailbox requirements. He had just finished making coffee when his phone chimed with the first response to his post. "Holy cow, man. She didn't just violate HOA overreach, she committed a federal crime. Mailboxes are considered federal property once installed. Check out U.S. Code Title 18, Section 1705. Also, opening your mail? That's mail theft under Section 1708. Call the Postal Inspection Service now." Michael nearly spilled his coffee. Federal crime? He quickly opened a new browser tab and searched for the referenced legal codes. Within minutes, he was staring at the unambiguous language of federal law. Whoever willfully or maliciously injures, tears down, or destroys any letter box or other receptacle intended or used for the receipt or delivery of mail on any mail route, or breaks open the same, or willfully or maliciously injures, defaces, or destroys any mail deposited therein, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years, or both. Further reading confirmed what the forum poster had claimed. Once installed and used for mail delivery, mailboxes became authorized depositories under federal protection. Even property owners couldn't legally remove them without proper authorization, and certainly no HOA president had authority to do so. Michael's phone rang. It was Mrs. Ramirez. "Michael, dear, I saw what happened with your mailbox. It's not right what Patricia did." "Thanks, Mrs. Ramirez. I'm actually learning something interesting about mailbox laws." "Oh." There was a note of curiosity in her voice. "Did you know mailboxes are protected by federal law? Tampering with them is actually a criminal offense." The line went silent for a moment. "You're kidding. Patricia could be in real trouble then." "Potentially serious trouble," Michael confirmed, scrolling through another legal resource. "You happen to know our local postmaster's name or contact information?" "Jim Hargrove. Been our postmaster for 15 years. Lovely man, can't stand Patricia either after she reported him for his mail truck being parked improperly during deliveries." She hesitated. "Are you going to report her?" Michael considered the question. "I believe I am. This goes beyond petty HOA overreach. She removed federal property and accessed my private mail without authorization." After thanking Mrs. Ramirez, Michael called the local post office and asked to speak with Postmaster Hargrove. The conversation was brief but productive. Hargrove sounded genuinely concerned about the situation and directed Michael to file a formal complaint with the United States Postal Inspection Service immediately. "Document everything," Hargrove advised. "The footage, her admission on your answering machine, everything. These inspectors take mailbox tampering very seriously." Within the hour, Michael had completed the online complaint form, uploaded his evidence, and received a confirmation that a postal inspector would contact him within 24 to 48 hours. He also composed a carefully worded email to the entire HOA board, excluding Patricia, attaching relevant federal statutes and his USPI's complaint number. As he clicked send, Michael felt a strange mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also sadness that neighborhood relations had deteriorated to this point. Still, as an architect, he understood the importance of boundaries and structural integrity, concepts that applied to communities as well as buildings. By afternoon, word had begun spreading through Oak Ridge Estates. Michael's phone buzzed repeatedly with text messages from neighbors he hadn't even met yet, sharing their own stories of Patricia's tyrannical rule. One elderly resident wrote, "In 8 years, she cited me 37 times for having my garbage can visible from the street. I'm in a wheelchair. Thank you for standing up to her. Michael realized this had become larger than his mailbox. Sometimes a single boundary defended became a rallying point for many who had suffered in silence. 2 weeks passed in a strange calm. Patricia had gone suspiciously quiet after receiving Michael's email. No citations appeared on any doors in Oak Ridge Estates, and her SUV remained conspicuously absent from its usual patrol routes. Some residents speculated she had taken an impromptu vacation. Others whispered that she was consulting with attorneys. Michael had almost convinced himself the matter might dissolve quietly when Mrs. Ramirez called him on a Tuesday afternoon. "You won't believe what's happening at Patricia's house right now," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained excitement. "There's a government car in her driveway. 2 people in suits just went inside." Michael thanked her for the update and continued with his workday, determined not to gloat. Whatever came of the federal complaint, he merely wanted justice and clear boundaries, not revenge. At 7:30 that evening, his doorbell rang. Standing on his porch were Stan Wilson and Deborah Landers from the HOA board, both looking uncomfortable. "We need to talk about what happened with Patricia today," Stan began after Michael invited them in. The postal inspectors served her with documentation of federal charges for mailbox tampering and mail theft. Deborah nodded, her pearl earrings swinging rhythmically. They explained that removing your mailbox without authorization was a federal offense with potential penalties up to $250,000 and 3 years imprisonment. Her eyes widened at the figures. "And accessing your mail without permission carries similar penalties." "What's Patricia saying?" Michael asked, offering them seats at his kitchen table. Stan sighed heavily. "She's blaming the board, claiming we all authorized the removal." He shook his head. "We did no such thing. In fact, the board never discussed your mailbox specifically. Patricia acted entirely on her own authority." "The postal inspectors want statements from all board members," Deborah added. "And they've informed us the HOA itself could face up to $5,000 in organizational fines for Patricia's actions." "We called an emergency board meeting tonight," Stan continued. "The vote was unanimous to remove Patricia as president, effective immediately. Her interpretation of our authority has clearly crossed legal boundaries." Michael nodded, absorbing this information. "I'm not interested in punishing the HOA as a whole. My issue was specifically with Patricia's actions and abuse of power." "We appreciate that," Deborah said, visibly relieved. "We'd like to offer a formal apology for what happened and assure you that your original mailbox will be replaced at HOA expense, if you'd like." "Unfortunately, Patricia claims she had your original mailbox destroyed," Stan added grimly. "That's fine," Michael replied. "I can order a new one." The conversation shifted to the future of the HOA. Stan and Deborah explained that in response to this incident, they were forming a committee to rewrite the community guidelines with clearer language and proper legal review. To Michael's surprise, they invited him to join. "Your architectural background would be valuable," Stan explained. "Plus, you've shown you're willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." The following week, Oak Ridge Estates held its most well-attended HOA meeting in history. Every chair was filled and residents stood along the walls of the community center meeting room. Patricia was notably absent, having been ordered by the postal inspectors not to discuss the case with potential witnesses while the investigation proceeded. Stan, as interim president, opened with a statement acknowledging the board's failure to properly oversee HOA enforcement actions. Michael then presented a draft of revised guidelines that specified exact procedures for violation notices, appeals processes, and limits to the board's authority. Near the meeting's end, the community manager read an official statement. Patricia Winters had accepted a plea agreement with federal prosecutors. She would pay $1,500 in fines, serve 100 hours of community service, and issue a public apology to Michael and the community. In exchange, prosecutors would not pursue the full criminal charges that could have resulted in imprisonment. As residents filed out after the meeting, many stopped to thank Michael or share their own stories of relief. One elderly gentleman clapped him on the shoulder. "Son, I painted my shutters, the color I wanted today for the first time in 9 years." When Michael finally arrived home that evening, he stood in his driveway for a moment, admiring his blue door under the porch light. Soon, a matching modern mailbox would again stand at his curb, not as a symbol of defiance, but as a reminder that sometimes the most important blueprints aren't for buildings, but for communities we create together.